The NFL Draft All-Star Circuit is upon us, so today on the show, we're looking at the East-West Shrine Game and some prospects to know that may be particularly relevant for the Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special shout out and welcome to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Getting started at the end of this week in about 72 hours is the first day of East-West Shrine practices, which means we're at the start of the college/NFL Draft All-Star Circuit, which is a pivotal piece of the evaluation process for college prospects because there's intimate time that the teams can spend with the players who are there to participate. We, over the next 2 days, are going to give shine on this show for the Shrine today and the Senior Bowl tomorrow because on Friday, I'm hopping on a plane. I'm flying to Dallas, and I'm going to be boots on the ground in Dallas for the Shrine, and then I'm flying from Dallas to Mobile, and I'm going to be boots on the ground in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. So it's going to be very busy next 10 days or so for us here as we make the rounds. And with me making the rounds and me not being in my home setup and me traveling to be at these events and doing my part for college evaluations, which I do for 33rd team. And obviously it's a big part of what we do with our off-season programming here on Locked On Dolphins and over at Locked On NFL Scouting. So you know what? We're going to give each one of these events their shine here today on the show. So looking at the Shrine roster today, and this is an event that has gotten a little bit more competitive as far as the talent that they've been able to procure over the last couple of years under the leadership of Eric Galko, who's the director of the Shrine. And I've known Eric for years from the NFL draft space, and he's done a great job putting together another competitive roster with him and his team. And so there's a number of players that as I look at this roster, I kind of have stars next to with eyes on for the Dolphins lens specifically. We're going to give them a shout out. But the first thing about it is all-star events in general. Why are they important? Why are they relevant? You can obviously watch the Shrine Bowl on NFL Network. The Senior Bowl practices get televised. There's all kinds of coverage opportunities here. It's important to keep the main thing, right? From a team perspective, and especially with an offseason that's starting off with the tone of which the Dolphins offseason is starting off with, which is culture with a microscope and player commitment and player tardiness and culture fits and a lot of very unsavory types of conversations about, in some ways for some players, we don't know names here specifically, but there's a professionalism that you're left wanting when these are the kinds of things that are brought up. Like, well, I kept finding guys for meetings and they kept not showing up on time. So we're going to change the way that we do things this year moving forward. Well, good. I hope we do. And I hope those kinds of players are not a part of the mix because that's not the recipe for being able to continue to play football through January 22nd of next year, which means you're making a playoff run. You can't have guys that's just, whatever. I'll get there 5 minutes late. I'll get there 3 minutes late. Go ahead, fine me my $10,000. I don't care. I'll just pay it. Can't happen, right? So to get to know these young players, especially with the climate of what college football has become with NIL, I think it's going to be a little easier to further compartmentalize who are the players that are ready to make the leap and be professionals, and who are the players who may need to learn how to be a professional when they get to this level. Because a lot of these college kids now, they are compensated for their name, image, and likeness, and they're compensated for their performance on the field, directly or indirectly through the value of their name, image, and likeness. So when you're given it, it used to be you're drafting a 20 or 21 or 22 or 23-year-old, and they're signing a contract, and there's a signing bonus on there that's at least six figures, if not seven figures, for the first and probably second round draft picks. Like, how are they going to react to that kind of life-changing money that young in their careers? Well, thankfully, with NIL, these guys are getting those kinds of figures to play college ball now. So the interview process is a big piece of the puzzle here for the teams, because you get a chance to meet some of these players. I'll give you an example from this year's Shrine roster at Shavon Revel, corner from East Carolina. He was a JUCO before he made it to East Carolina, and he used to work at an Amazon warehouse and work overnight shifts as a forklift driver. You can actually Google his name in Amazon, and you could still find his old LinkedIn profile as a warehouse worker at Amazon, working the forklift on the overnight shifts to make ends meet while playing at JUCO, to get himself in a position to transfer to a school like East Carolina, and is now in the all-star circuit. And a player like that, he gets it. He gets the doing the unglamorous or the little things that then in turn will position you to be successful, because you're willing to do the unsavory things to survive while you pursue a dream. And a guy that's willing to do that is probably going to be willing to come into an NFL franchise and keep his nose to the grindstone and work hard and be really hungry. So you find out about stories like that. And those are the kinds of stories I'm excited about when I go down. And, I'm not a part of the team interviews, so it's a little bit less about scheme or a specific city, but just hearing the stories of the players to kind of be able to identify more players who have backgrounds like this, who have had to kind of fight, scratch, and claw to be in a position, because that's the kind of hunger I think this team needs. This team obviously needs as many draft picks as they can get. I hear from a lot of you. It's like, Kyle, what do you think about trading for this guy or signing this 10-year vet in free agency? It's like, there's a value to vets. And I get this team is going to try to compete through transition, as they should try to compete through transition, but they are going to, in my opinion, be in transition this upcoming year. And the more of I look at the Rams as a team that just had a divisional round exit, and they were a F them draft picks mantra for several years, bunch of big contracts. They had a regression year. They embraced drafting by volume. Lo and behold, they've made the playoffs the last 2 years through transition, and now their future looks really bright. That's the kind of transition I think this team needs to start aspiring to embrace and pursue. So young guys like this, especially guys at an event like the Shrine, where most of the talent here, they do have some upper echelon talent. But most of the names here are mid-round guys that are going to come in with a chip on their shoulder because they got overdrafted. Who are the really hungry players out of that? I'm excited to find out. And I already know, based off the tape, there's some names that I think Dolphins fans should be mindful of and be prepared to hear more of on this program as we move forward from here. We're going to get into that a little bit next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel app is easy to navigate. The variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite teams or just looking to keep some extra excitement to the playoffs with your team, presumably the Dolphins, eliminated. FanDuel has you covered right now. Chiefs favored at home by 1.5 against the Bills, and the Eagles favored by almost a touchdown, 6.5 points against the Commanders. Visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So who are some of the names that I kind of have soft circled already? Quarterback is a spot to keep an eye because this is probably the expected range of where I suspect the Dolphins are going to get a veteran quarterback to come in. But you need a hyper competitive quarterback room. And I don't think any one player just kind of dust your hands off and say, well, we added somebody to the room. We're good to go. Like, I want some youth to this group as well. So Shedeur Sanders is the marquee player at this year's event. Obviously projected to be an early draft selection. Doesn't have great physical tools. He's the son of Deion Sanders. I'm sure if you have any pulse on college football, you're familiar with Shedeur Sanders. I do think he's a pretty good stylistic fit for Miami. I just don't expect there to be a realm of possibility where he's on the board where the Dolphins would be picking. But as far as the other names that are here, a lot of Dolphins fans are going to invoke the name Kyle McCord, formerly of Ohio State. He's at Syracuse. But my favorite is probably Max Brosmer from Minnesota. Brosmer was at New Hampshire, transferred to Minnesota. Kind of similar physical skill set to Kyle McCord, where these guys are 6'2", 220, don't have great outside of structure athleticism, but both throw with anticipation. They don't have the strongest arms, but you could tell that they've gotten to where they're at because they've had to adapt the way that they play to see the field and anticipate the field and throw accurately in holes in zone coverage. Both of these guys are guys that their accuracy within 20 yards is really good. They can throw bucket shots down the field. So there's a similar physical profile to who the Dolphins have as their starter. And Tua Tagovailoa can obviously throw deep, but he's killer accurate in the intermediate and shallow areas of the field with really good sense of timing and anticipation and rhythm as passers. And he had to grow and evolve that way because he didn't have the strongest arm. He's less reliant on, I can hold the ball for an extra tick, or I could see it later and throw it and still get away with it. Brosmer and McCord are that kind of player. If you looked at the spread quarterback option with a big arm, if you wanted to develop somebody with some more tools, I think Brady Cook from Missouri is probably the one that I would be most interested in for Miami. As far as the running back position, there's two big backs here. Tajh Brooks from Texas Tech he's not going to fit the Blazer profile of the Dolphins, but he is an angry, heavy set of pads runner between the tackles. So if you're looking to replace the Jeff Wilson roster spot, and everybody kind of wrung their hands over Chris Brooks and losing Chris Brooks, and he goes to Green Bay and plays exactly how you thought Chris Brooks could play or was capable of playing based off his preseason tape. A name like Tajh Brooks, who played in the spread system at Texas Tech, is one that I like a lot. But if you wanted to go with a big back with explosiveness, Raheem Sanders from South Carolina, is kind of the guy for me at the running back position, where he used to be at Arkansas, had a severe injury, has to come back. You could tell he's still kind of working his way back. All of his explosiveness isn't back. But this is like a 235-pound cat that'll run you over, and you get him in the open field and you can run away from him. Now, when he has to redirect off his tracks, it's not great. So you need to have good, consistent win at the point of attack efforts in order to give him the tracks he needs to hit those explosive plays in the run game. But he can run downhill, and he's a totally different kind of body type than what the Dolphins have. So how much more diversification are you going to get in your run game this year? If you added a player like this, I think it would tell you a lot about what they're intending to do with the diversification of the group and of the run game. So there's some context clues that maybe are going to be helpful for you with what direction they go from a personnel perspective. As far as pass catchers go, I really like the tight end room. It's got a familiar last name in Gadsden, if that sounds familiar. Oronde Gadsden II. Tight end, really a big slot, but 6'5", 225, 230, big time catch radius, just like his dad. Makes some awesome plays in the passing game. And I think if he was a tight end, specifically, we did the tight end assessment, performance assessment yesterday. You're looking predominantly for a Y. But if you're looking for a big slot F who can also play some wide receiver and be a possession type guy, this is the kind of player that I think makes a lot of sense for a role of that type. Now, do you want to use him with a early day 3 pick and groom him to replace Jonnu Smith in the passing game? Are you comfortable with more than one type of that kind of player in your tight end room and carrying more than one? I don't have the answers. But I do know I can see plenty of overlap with Jonnu Smith and what he did in the passing game and what Oronde Gadsden does a really, really good job of for Syracuse. Also, Luke Lachey from Iowa. Anytime you get an Iowa tight end, you at least got to put the star next to him because they're very wide zone and outside zone heavy oriented in the run game. Those guys usually know how to block. So Luke Lachey, a little bit more of the traditional Y type of tight end that we talked about a little earlier in the show. Offensive line. It's an interesting group. There's a blend of like lower tools, big school players, and then a lot of small school guys that actually have some pretty intriguing physical tools at their disposal. As I look at who they have collected here, Marcus Ware from Montana State is a guard who I think has the right kind of size, play demeanor, mobility to be an interesting name for the Dolphins and what we've expected their run game to look like. I would point to Georgia's Xavier Truss as somebody who, playing at a higher level of competition, maybe a little bit more ready, but just doesn't have the right kind of tools. Is he a swing tackle that could make some sense for you? But I'm excited to see names like Thomas Perry from Middlebury or Aiden Williams from Minnesota Duluth or Gareth Warren from Lindenwood. Like, these are some of the small school guys that you don't get put on this radar unless you have NFL measurables or NFL athleticism. And how do you perform when you're now lining up from defensive linemen that played at Boise State or Virginia Tech, like Antoine Powell-Ryland, or Alabama, like Q Robinson's not participating, but Missouri, Johnny Walker from Missouri, or Maryland, or Georgia Tech, or Georgia. Like, you go right down the list. There's a bunch of Power 4 or Group of 4 competition that you now get to see a bunch of these small school guys at and see who jumps off the practice field at you. And that's part of the value of the practice element of these all-star games. Some names on the defensive side that definitely popped to me. Some guys with some injuries, some guys with some tools, a guy that I don't know how much he's going to participate because he's projected to be a top 20 pick. Lots more to get to on the defensive side. Make sure you guys stick with us. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. It's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, it's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. As a listener of Locked On Dolphins, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show and prioritize your mental health. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. Let's get into the defensive names that jump off the screen. And it starts with Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle from University of Michigan. And we'll see what he does. Some of these participants are a little bit more oriented in the interview process as compared to the on-field process, or they'll have an injury that they're going to nurse. And you don't want to make assumptions on who you are or are not going to see on the practice field. But Kenneth Grant going to an all-star event and getting hands-on, seeing what he looks like in person, if he is an active participant, how athletic does he look? He's obviously got movement skills that far transcend what you would expect from a 320-plus pound individual. And there is a realm of possibility in which I see Kenneth Grant being the kind of player that the Dolphins could add, depending on what they do in free agency, who they choose to bring back from their big contracts that they have to make decisions on, who they choose to trade or not trade or re-sign from last year's group. If they get Calais Campbell back, maybe it makes it less likely. But if they don't get Calais Campbell back and Benito Jones, they want an upgrade over that player, and they want somebody that could take snaps and rush the passer a little bit higher level. Like, you kind of have not a blank slate, but you have a lot of directions that you can go. And Kenneth Grant is the other heavy-hitting name that is on this roster. So he's obviously one to watch. I think the edge group has a lot of intriguing talent. South Florida football fans should recognize the name Tyler Barron, transferred to University of Miami from University of Tennessee. Physical gifts, got a prototype build. I also like Tyler Batty from BYU as like a base end. I see him in some parallels to Emmanuel Agba without the athleticism that Agba had when he first came into the league at Oklahoma State, as far as really long hands, can play tight alignments and over top of tackles and occupy offensive linemen and give a guy that's walked up on the edge plenty of room to work and operate and keep the guys behind you clean. That's a name that I would be really fascinated to see this team add. And then they also have a couple pass rushers like Antoine Powell-Ryland from Virginia Tech, who's a long-armed, angular guy with an explosive first step and a pretty diverse set of pass rush moves. But he's a designated pass rusher. He's a pass rush specialist. Do you want to go that route? Do you want to go for a little bit more of a power player? And if you do, maybe Elijah Roberts, formerly University of Miami, transferred to SMU. There's lots of different body types that you can find with this edge group and different roles within that room. And if the Dolphins end up keeping Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, and they obviously have Chop Robinson, and how much are they going to put on the plate of Muhammad Kamara? Are they going to try to fill in an ancillary player around to that? If that entire nucleus is back, you could go with a lot of different directions for one last name to add to the mix. And if they don't bring back Calais Campbell and they go with a heavier-handed interior guy that plays at a heavier weight, well, maybe some of that can be Deshaun Hand if you bring back Deshaun Hand. But Calais Campbell played snaps on the outside. And how much of that does Bradley Chubb take, assuming Bradley Chubb's back? Or if it's not, you could be getting into needing an additional name to be a part of your rotation. And that's before you even get into the conversation about the durability of that group and how comfortable you are or are not with it. Casual decisions to make. But as I look at the linebacker group, there's a couple of names that pop to me, starting first and foremost with Jay Higgins. He's a linebacker from Iowa, very high football IQ player. He's somebody who doesn't have the longest arms or the fastest 40 time or the biggest frame. But you could tell he's gotten to where he's at because he's a good play processor. Now, he made some plays in coverage this year. He found some more impact plays this year as far as turnovers and generating turnovers and opportunities for teammates to have turnovers. But Jay Higgins would be the kind of player that if you brought back Tyrel Dotson and you wanted a young player to compete with Tyrel Dotson, I think Jay Higgins is probably, just based off positional value and the fact that he's not a great athlete, these stacked linebackers usually fall a little bit. Like, this could be a late 4th, 5th round type draft selection. And I think he can play. Another name that I think can play is Chris Paul from Ole Miss. A little bit more of a speedy, rangy player. Of that entire Ole Miss defense was filled with guys that could just run like the wind. So that's two names at linebacker with Jay Higgins and Chris Paul that I would put a star next to if I was a Dolphins fan coming into the weekend. then you have cornerback, or I should say the secondary, because they put everything together. And the first name that pops is Tajh Alexander from LSU. He is a cornerback who a lot of people, he's been a riser, really, for probably the last couple months. He's a big, long corner, listed at 6'2", 195. He's somebody who has the length, profile of a perimeter player. He's got good ball skills, and he runs well. So you got height, weight, speed elements. There's some guys like that, like Nahshon Wright a couple of years ago out of Oregon State. Cowboys drafted him in the 3rd round, and he was always a developmental guy, but you take the swing of the bat. But Tajh Alexander only really got to LSU, 2023, transferred from one of the regional FCS schools, and then had an injury in 2023 that kept him out. So there's kind of been like this long, winding, unorthodox path for Tajh Alexander to this point. But the traits, very apparent. And if you consider Ethan Bonner's a bigger corner who can run like the wind, if you consider what Cam Smith was supposed to be for this team, you consider Storm Duck. These are guys that have some length, who can run linear well. This kind of fits the profile of another player who could potentially be introduced into that mix of competition for guys who are going to make roster spots. Is Tajh Alexander going to be on the board when the Dolphins make sense, when it makes sense for them to pick a corner? I don't know. And you're getting pretty deep into the draft to be at a point where you feel confident that he would unequivocally be the best player available. Could he theoretically be the best player available when the Dolphins get on the board with their comp pick in the 3rd? Maybe. He'd be a name that probably, if he's sitting there staring you at the face while you're on the clock at the beginning of day 3 with your first 4th round pick, that's probably the stratosphere for me where I'd say, hey, this is going to be a little hard to pass up. And we already mentioned Shavon Revel as the other name. And we gassed up Shedeur Sanders. We gassed up Kenneth Grant. Ironically, I'm going to get criticized for using the word wrong either way. Conveniently enough, Shavon Revel is actually my highest graded player here for the game. He is all of the things that we said Tajh Alexander was. JUCO product, transfers to East Carolina, plays 3 years. Really felt like this was going to be the breakout year for him. Was around the ball more this year, suffered a torn ACL after the 3rd game at practice. But he's played all the kicking game units and punt return, kickoff return, over almost 200 snaps in his career of special teams play at ECU in 3 seasons. The story about what he did to survive while he was in JUCO, trying to get back up to a higher level of ball. He runs a 4.4 verified. He drove overnight to go to a ECU tryout or camp and ran a 4.4 and jumped 11 feet in the broad jump at a 6'3", 195-pound corner. Needless to say, he got an offer. And they've had some opportunity to play up in competition. I thought he played well against Michigan in 2023 when he played against the Michigan Wolverines. So he's had some opportunities, and man, he is a physical player. You're not going to see anything with him on the practice field because he is still recovering from the ACL. But if you told me the Dolphins could get one player off this roster for their team, and it was Shavon Revel, like, I think you're getting the best player off the roster. It's just, of course, a matter of, do you trade back from 13? Predictively, I don't think he's a player that would be in play at 13, but never say never. Does he slide out of the first because of the medical? A lot of Dolphins fans are going to roll their eyes at the idea of a player with a medical tag and drafting that early in the draft, because that's kind of been the bugaboo for the roster the last couple of years. So I get all that. But right now, you're just identifying players who can be assets to teams moving forward, and I think Shavon Revel is going to be that for somebody. So that's your Shrine Primer. Tomorrow's Senior Bowl. We're going to take a little break from the performance assessment stuff, hopefully get you guys ready for practices this weekend and reports coming out of Dallas. I'll have some extra shows for you guys, or at least that's the plan. And keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I am out of here. Go Fins.